At 76, the name Meryl Streep still sends shivers through Hollywood. She has been called the greatest living actress, a force of nature, a woman who could transform into anyone and make you believe every word, every gesture, every tear. For decades, she stood at the very top, admired not only for her talent but for her grace, her humility, and her ability to carry stories that left entire generations in awe. And yet, behind the golden trophies, behind the standing ovations, behind the flawless image the world thought it knew, lies a tragedy so unexpected, so quietly devastating, that even her most devoted fans were left shocked when whispers began to surface. How could someone who seemed to have everything, fame, family, respect, and a legacy that will outlive us all, be hiding such heartbreak? The truth is, Meryl's story at 76 is not the fairy tale many imagined. What looks like triumph on the outside carries shadows that few have dared to speak about. The woman who appeared invincible, untouched by time, has faced struggles that go beyond the stage and the screen. They are personal, painful, and, for the first time, they reveal the hidden cost of a life lived in the spotlight. What really happened to Meryl Streep? What is the heartbreaking truth that fans never saw coming? And how has her life, one of the most celebrated in Hollywood history, been shaped by moments so tragic they risk overshadowing even her greatest triumphs? Stay with us until the end, because the tragedy of Meryl Streep at 76 will break your heart in ways you never expected. Meryl Streep entered the world on June 22, 1949, in Summit, New Jersey. She was born into a family that was comfortable, middle-class, and quietly ambitious. Her father, Harry William Streep Jr., was a pharmaceutical executive, a man rooted in practicality, who believed in discipline and hard work. Her mother, Mary Wolfe Wilkinson Streep, was an artist, a commercial artist by profession, but more importantly, a free spirit who saw creativity as a necessity, not a luxury. It was her mother who instilled in young Mary Louise the belief that she could be anybody she wanted to be. That phrase, repeated throughout her childhood, would become prophetic. Mary Louise, known as Meryl thanks to a family nickname, was not born into the chaos of Hollywood, nor surrounded by the glamour of show business. Her childhood was suburban, filled with piano lessons, church choir singing, and a mixture of German, Irish, and Swiss ancestry that tied her to deeply traditional roots. She was, in every way, a normal American child in appearance. But those who knew her then recall a girl who could transform. A child who would slip into accents, imitate relatives, and put on little performances at family gatherings. It wasn't obvious to everyone, but in hindsight, the gift was already there. Meryl could become someone else convincingly, without hesitation. By high school, her gifts began to take shape. She was a cheerleader, bright, blonde, and popular, with the kind of presence that drew people in. She wasn't the archetype of a theater nerd tucked away backstage. She was confident, visible, magnetic. Yet even then, she began experimenting with voice, mannerisms, and roles. In her teenage years, Meryl developed an interest in opera, training her voice with surprising discipline. For a time, she considered pursuing a career in music. But destiny had other plans. After high school, Meryl enrolled at Vassar College, an all-women's school in Poughkeepsie, New York. At Vassar, the world of theater truly opened to her. Here she encountered professors and peers who saw her as something rare. Not just talented, but astonishingly transformative. Unlike many students who played versions of themselves on stage, Meryl could vanish entirely. Her classmates often recalled how she would take on a role and, by the second rehearsal, it no longer felt like acting. It was as though the character had swallowed her whole. She could switch accents flawlessly, embody emotions as if they were her own, and deliver performances that left her peers speechless. By the time she graduated in 1971, it was clear Meryl was destined for more than community theater. She applied and was accepted into the prestigious Yale School of Drama, where the true sharpening of her craft began. At Yale, she pushed herself into extremes: comedy, tragedy, Shakespeare, contemporary plays. She played men, old women, comedic characters, and deeply tragic figures. Yale wasn't easy. The program was brutal, designed to break down ego and rebuild actors from the ground up. Many students dropped out under the weight of criticism and pressure. Meryl thrived. It wasn't just talent, it was discipline. She approached each role as if it were life or death, studying accents, gestures, and histories until she knew them better than the playwrights themselves. This meticulous nature, honed at Yale, would later become the hallmark of her Hollywood career. But life at Yale wasn't only about art. It was also about the personal connections she built, the people who would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Among them was a young actor whose presence would mark both the brightest and darkest chapters of her early adulthood. It was in the mid-1970s, as Meryl began establishing herself in New York theater, that she met John Cazale. He was already an acclaimed actor, having appeared in The Godfather, 1972, and Dog Day Afternoon, 1975. He wasn't a matinee idol by Hollywood standards, slim, balding, with an intensity that burned quietly rather than explosively. But to Meryl, John was magnetic. Their love story began quietly, born out of mutual respect for the craft. Both were actors devoted not to fame but to truth. John, with his soft-spoken wisdom, and Meryl, with her transformative brilliance, found in each other a partner who understood the burdens of artistry. Together, they moved into an apartment in New York. Friends would later describe them as inseparable, constantly rehearsing lines, sharing ideas and planning futures. There was talk of marriage, of children, of a long life built on love and art. Then came the diagnosis. John Cazale was just 39 when he learned he had lung cancer. The disease was aggressive, spreading quickly. For many, this would have been the point of retreat, the stage in life when partners quietly step back, unable to face the inevitability of death. Meryl did the opposite. She became his rock. Through hospital visits, treatments, and the devastating toll of illness, she remained by his side. When John was cast in The Deer Hunter, 1978, Meryl took a role in the film as well, not just to advance her career, but to be near him, to care for him, to ensure he wasn't alone. Those who witnessed those days often spoke of Meryl's devotion. She was already a rising star, with opportunities opening before her, yet she chose to prioritize John's comfort over everything else. On March 12, 1978, John Cazale died. He was 39 years old. Meryl was shattered. In a single breath, the love of her life and the future they had planned vanished. For weeks, she struggled to continue, moving out of their shared apartment and collapsing under the weight of grief. But in tragedy, something remarkable happened. Meryl carried John's memory into her performances. She once said that everything she learned about acting, she learned from him. His death infused her work with an emotional depth that critics and audiences could not ignore. In the years that followed, roles like Kramer vs. Kramer and Sophie's Choice bore the invisible fingerprints of that heartbreak. Every tear, every trembling line delivery, every moment of vulnerability on screen was not merely performance, it was memory. The world saw brilliance. Meryl felt loss. And that duality, triumph and tragedy side by side, would follow her for the rest of her life. The death of John Cazale in 1978 could have been the breaking point for Meryl Streep. For many, grief becomes a wall too high to climb, leaving lives fractured and potential abandoned. Yet for Meryl, tragedy became fuel. She poured her sorrow into her art, and almost overnight, Hollywood began to notice a power in her performances that was raw, unfiltered, and devastatingly real. Her first major film role came in The Deer Hunter, 1978, where she acted alongside Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken. Though her role was relatively small, the depth she brought to it left critics stunned. She wasn't just acting, she seemed to live inside the skin of her character, radiating authenticity. What audiences didn't know was that behind those tear-filled eyes on screen, she was channeling her real grief over Cazale's illness. The industry quickly recognized her as a rare force. In 1979, she starred in Kramer vs. Kramer opposite Dustin Hoffman, a film about a custody battle that would earn her an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. Her portrayal of Joanna Kramer, conflicted, fragile, yet fiercely determined, was praised as one of the most authentic depictions of womanhood ever captured on screen. Ironically, the production of Kramer vs. Kramer mirrored the turbulence in her life. Dustin Hoffman, known for his intensity, reportedly pushed Meryl into emotional spaces that were raw and uncomfortable. Some accounts even describe him using Meryl's grief over John Cazale to elicit certain reactions. Yet, out of that difficult process came a performance so genuine that it etched her name into Hollywood history. The early 1980s only amplified her rise. In Sophie's Choice, 1982, she delivered what many still consider the single greatest performance in film history. Playing a Polish Holocaust survivor tormented by guilt and impossible choices, Meryl immersed herself fully, learning Polish, German, and adopting a flawless accent. The emotional weight of the film was nearly unbearable, but critics hailed her as a genius. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, cementing her place not only as a star but as a master of her craft. By the mid-1980s, Meryl Streep was no longer simply an actress. She was a cultural phenomenon. But as the world celebrated her genius, Meryl herself remained private, cautious, and wary of fame. Behind the awards and red carpets, she was quietly seeking stability. Something steady to hold on to after the storm of loss that had nearly consumed her. With her personal life anchored, Meryl's career in the 1980s and 1990s soared into territories few could dream of. Unlike most actresses, who were often typecast into specific roles, Meryl seemed to defy categorization. She could play anyone, any age, any nationality, any personality, and make it believable. Her range became legendary. In Out of Africa, 1985, she played Danish author Karen Blixen with elegance and restraint, mastering yet another accent and immersing herself in the sweeping romance of the African landscape. The film became a critical and commercial success, and once again, Meryl was at its heart. In Ironweed, 1987, she portrayed a homeless woman with gritty realism, acting alongside Jack Nicholson. Then came A Cry in the Dark, 1988, where she embodied Lindy Chamberlain, an Australian woman accused of murdering her baby, in a case that captivated the world. Meryl's uncanny ability to capture not only the accent but also the emotional turbulence of her character earned her yet another Academy Award nomination. By the 1990s, Meryl began experimenting with lighter roles. In Death Becomes Her, 1992, she showcased her comedic talents, proving she was not confined to heavy dramas. Audiences loved seeing her playful side, even as she satirized Hollywood vanity. But it was The Bridges of Madison County, 1995, that reaffirmed her as one of the most powerful dramatic actresses of her time. Starring opposite Clint Eastwood, Meryl played Francesca, a lonely Italian housewife who experiences a brief but life-altering romance. Her performance was subtle, tender, and heartbreaking, so deeply human that audiences wept in theaters. Critics declared it one of the finest performances of her career. Throughout these decades, Meryl became a symbol of artistic integrity. She didn't chase blockbusters or glamorous roles. She chose parts that challenged her, that allowed her to inhabit lives far removed from her own. Each film was a new transformation, a new revelation. But with this brilliance came another tragedy, the burden of perfection. Hollywood and the public began to expect the impossible from her. Every role had to be flawless, every performance a masterpiece. While other actors could fail without consequence, Meryl was held to a standard so high it was nearly inhuman. This invisible weight, this constant demand for brilliance, was a quiet tragedy in itself. For behind the golden veneer of her career, Meryl carried not only her own grief and responsibilities but also the impossible expectations of an entire industry. From the outside, Meryl Streep's life seemed almost storybook perfect. A luminous career, a supportive husband, for healthy children, and the admiration of audiences worldwide. Yet behind the screen, away from the spotlight's glow, she endured struggles that rarely made the headlines. One of the greatest challenges was balancing motherhood with her relentless career. Hollywood often glamorizes the concept of the working mother, but for Meryl, the reality was filled with guilt and exhaustion. She would sometimes return home after filming emotionally draining scenes only to be met with the everyday chaos of bedtime routines and school projects. The contrast between Hollywood's demands and her maternal instincts created a quiet war within her. She once admitted in interviews that she often felt like she was failing somewhere. Either on set when she thought of her children, or at home when she thought of the work she was turning down. This tension became a constant undercurrent in her life. Financial pressures were not her burden, but emotional ones were. As her fame grew, so did the relentless scrutiny. She was celebrated as the greatest actress of her generation, yet that praise came with a double edge. Directors and audiences expected genius from her every single time. Unlike many of her peers, who were allowed an occasional flop, Meryl was not. Even her smallest performance was dissected under a microscope. The media often painted her as untouchable, distant, even perfect. But that word, perfect, was both a compliment and a curse. Privately, Meryl disliked it. She felt it erased her humanity, her struggles, her doubts. She was no machine. She was a woman with insecurities, sleepless nights, and fears of letting people down. And then there was the burden of privacy. She guarded her family life fiercely, refusing to expose her children to the circus of fame. Paparazzi often criticized her for being cold or aloof, but in reality, she was protecting the fragile bubble of normalcy she had worked so hard to create. She wanted her children to know her as Mom, not as Meryl Streep, legend of cinema. These private struggles didn't end her career, they fueled it. Every role became a channel for her suppressed emotions. When she played women torn between conflicting worlds, like Joanna Kramer in Kramer vs. Kramer or Francesca in The Bridges of Madison County, she was not just acting. She was drawing from her own life, from the ache of wanting to be everywhere at once, from the heartbreak of realizing she couldn't. To the audience, these were brilliant performances. To Meryl, they were confessions. Meryl's early life had already been marked by devastating loss with John Cazale's death. But as the years passed, more losses followed, friends, collaborators, and icons she had worked beside. Each passing etched another scar on her heart. The death of director Mike Nichols in 2014 was a particularly heavy blow. Nichols had directed Meryl in Silkwood, Heartburn, and Angels in America. Their professional partnership was legendary, but their friendship ran even deeper. Meryl often described him as one of the greatest influences in her life, both personally and artistically. Losing him was like losing a part of her creative soul. She also carried the grief of losing fellow actors she had admired and sometimes worked alongside: Philip Seymour Hoffman, whose tragic death in 2014 shook the acting community; Alan Rickman, who died in 2016, and others from her generation who departed far too soon. Even decades later, Meryl continued to speak tenderly about John Cazale, the man she had loved in her youth. She rarely mentioned him publicly, but when she did, her words were filled with reverence. She credited him with shaping her understanding of truth in performance. Though she went on to build a long marriage and a family, a piece of her heart remained tethered to the man she lost at just 28 years old. These losses did not weaken her. They added to the depth of her performances. Each time Meryl walked onto a set, she carried with her not only her extraordinary craft but also the ghosts of those she had loved and lost. The grief was there, stitched into her every movement, every glance, every trembling voice. At 76, Meryl Streep carries more than a filmography. She carries a lifetime of loss, hidden beneath her luminous smile. The world sees her as untouchable. But behind her grace lies a woman who has endured heartbreak after heartbreak, each one shaping the legend she became. At 76, Meryl Streep remains a name that commands respect, not only in Hollywood but across the globe. To most of the world, she seems ageless, still glowing at premieres, still radiant in interviews, still sharp and eloquent when speaking about her craft or the issues that matter most to her. But away from the bright flashes of cameras, there is a softer, more contemplative Meryl, one who quietly confronts the reality of time. Her most recent projects continue to prove her unmatched versatility. Whether stepping into a comedic role in a television series or lending her presence to a serious film about human resilience, she has not slowed down. But behind every performance lies an immense amount of preparation, focus, and energy. Something that, at 76, no longer comes as effortlessly as it once did. She has admitted in rare conversations that memorizing lines, enduring long filming schedules, and inhabiting emotionally demanding characters takes a heavier toll than it used to. She has also chosen to spend more time away from the spotlight. The once constant red carpet presence has become rarer. She appears when she must, delivering speeches that captivate audiences with wit and wisdom, but she prefers now to retreat afterward into the sanctuary of her private life. Friends and collaborators describe her as deeply introspective in recent years, grateful for the opportunities she has had, yet increasingly aware of the fragility of life and the inevitability of change. This quieter version of Meryl is rarely seen by fans, but it reveals the essence of who she is today, a woman who has given everything to her art, and who now longs for peace and simplicity, even while the world still demands her brilliance. From the outside, it appears as though Meryl Streep has lived a charmed life. But the truth, like in the lives of so many icons, is far more complicated. The tragedy of her later years is not a single catastrophic event, but a series of emotional burdens that have built up quietly, unnoticed by many of her admirers. In recent years, she has had to watch as close friends and colleagues, actors, directors, and mentors, have passed away. Each loss has left a mark on her heart. When Alan Rickman died in 2016, Streep spoke of him with a tenderness that revealed how much their professional and personal relationship meant to her. The passing of Mike Nichols, her longtime collaborator, devastated her, as did the deaths of many others she admired and shared stages with. These weren't just colleagues. They were people who had shaped her journey, who had walked beside her during her rise and reign. The public sees only the glamour, the gowns, the trophies, the ovations. What they don't see is the private grief, the mourning that takes place in quiet kitchens and on long solitary walks. With each passing year, as more peers fade from the world she once thrived in, she feels the weight of being one of the last great survivors of a golden era of acting. And then there is the unrelenting demand of the industry itself. Hollywood loves brilliance, but it can be merciless in how it treats aging women. For decades, Meryl was the exception to the rule, landing leading roles long after many actresses of her generation were pushed aside. But even she has felt the sting of those expectations, the constant need to prove she is still relevant, still bankable, still capable of outshining younger stars. That pressure, though invisible to her millions of fans, has been a heavy burden on her shoulders. Behind her glowing smile lies a woman who has carried more grief, exhaustion, and quiet sorrow than the world will ever fully know. Meryl Streep's filmography often feels like an emotional mirror of her real life, a reflection of the struggles, resilience, and vulnerabilities she has carried as a woman, wife, mother, and artist. In Sophie's Choice, her portrayal of a woman haunted by unbearable grief became one of the greatest performances in cinematic history. It was not just acting, it was a piece of her own soul, poured into a character who embodied loss and survival. Many critics have remarked that her ability to deliver such emotional depth came from her own lived experiences of love and heartbreak. In Doubt, she played a nun battling moral uncertainty and personal conviction. The film's tension mirrored the complexities of her own life, where choices are never simple, and where truth often hides in shadow. And in The Iron Lady, where she transformed into Margaret Thatcher, she offered audiences not just a portrait of power but also of loneliness, decline, and memory slipping away. For many, that performance carried an eerie resonance with the aging process that Streep herself was quietly confronting. Again and again, her roles seem to echo her private emotions, as if her career has been a lifelong dialogue between her art and her reality. Acting, for Meryl, has never been about pretending. It has been about revealing, sometimes too much, of the woman behind the mask. In recent years, Meryl Streep has quietly stepped back from the whirlwind pace that once defined her career. The woman who once appeared in 2 or 3 films a year now chooses projects sparingly, focusing instead on a life filled with moments of intimacy rather than grandeur. Friends note that she spends more time at home, often with her children and grandchildren. Her home has become a gathering place, filled with laughter, meals cooked together, and simple joys. The Hollywood icon, once constantly surrounded by directors, producers, and stylists, now delights in the company of toddlers running through her living room and the quiet satisfaction of watching her children become parents themselves. For Meryl, this retreat is not a surrender but a conscious choice. After decades of living under the scrutiny of cameras and critics, she has earned the right to disappear when she wishes. She no longer feels compelled to maintain a public image every moment of her life. Instead, she allows herself to be what she always longed to be, just a woman, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. And yet, even in retreat, the world does not forget her. Whenever she does emerge, for a rare interview, a prestigious award ceremony, or a new role, the air seems to shift. Audiences lean in, knowing they are witnessing something increasingly rare, the presence of a legend who has given so much and now asks only for peace. No matter how quietly she retreats, Meryl Streep's legacy in film is unshakable. Her body of work spans over 5 decades, encompassing genres, eras, and cultures. She has portrayed everything from Holocaust survivors to rock musicians, from English aristocrats to Italian housewives, from iconic world leaders to whimsical characters in musicals. There is no category she has not touched, no boundary she has not crossed. But her impact extends beyond the roles themselves. She redefined what it means to be a leading actress in Hollywood. At a time when women were often sidelined after 40, Streep proved that complex, intelligent, emotionally rich roles could and should be written for women of all ages. She challenged directors, inspired writers, and opened doors for generations of actresses who came after her. Countless actors cite her as an influence. Viola Davis once called her the greatest actor of all time, a sentiment echoed across the industry. Younger performers study her performances the way musicians study Beethoven or Shakespearean actors study Olivier. Her work is a curriculum in itself, a guidebook to what cinema can achieve when talent, dedication, and truth intersect. For decades to come, film students will analyze her scenes, critics will revisit her triumphs, and audiences will discover her anew. Meryl Streep's legacy is not simply her awards or her fame. It is the standard she set, a reminder that acting can be art of the highest form. Yet, as radiant as her legacy is, there is a tragedy woven into Meryl Streep's story, the heavy price of fame. While the world applauds her brilliance, few consider the sacrifices that brilliance demanded. For years, she sacrificed time with her family to inhabit the lives of characters who demanded her full emotional energy. She missed birthdays, milestones, and quiet moments at home because the world demanded her presence on set. Her career required total immersion, and though she gave willingly, the cost was undeniable. There is also the loneliness that comes with being perfect. Fans expect Meryl to always be composed, eloquent, and wise. But perfection is a prison. It leaves little room for mistakes, for vulnerability, for simply being human. Every misstep is magnified, every choice scrutinized. The burden of always being the greatest is not one she asked for, but it is one she has carried. And now, at 76, she reflects on that exchange with both gratitude and sorrow. Her fame has elevated her, but it has also weighed on her heart in ways that only she can fully understand. If Meryl Streep's story touched you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video.